A very warm welcome to today's virtual SPDN session. I will just briefly share a couple of slides, but by and large, we want to be able to interact as much as possible. This particular SPDN builds very much on the mini events that were hosted in 15 different locations up and down the UK and in Ireland and Greece and the Slovakia just 11 days ago. And so we wanted to bring everybody together to explore the same theme, really, which was about how can we support people based on this idea that we all have intrinsic resources, we're all intrinsically rich, and we need to create an environment in which that richness can come to the front, really, in which people can shine. And so today we want to look at how we can create systems that reflect human richness. And when we talk about systems, we talk about the kinds of people that make up a system around an individual or around a family or around a group or around a community. So we talk about systems in lots of different ways and want to encourage you to think about systems as being concerned with the people that are part of that system. That could be professionals, but that could equally be volunteers in your local community or the wider local community, and so on and so forth. So hopefully we can think about how to create healthier systems, richer systems in that respect. What you can do in the meantime, whilst I'm talking, is you can scan the QR code at the bottom left of your screen and let us know where you're joining us from this morning. And that gives us hopefully a nice little opportunity to see what kind of diversity we have in the room today. Whilst some of you will have been at the SPD event 2 weeks ago, it's by no means a given that all of you have been, and it's perfectly fine if you haven't been there at all. We'll give you an opportunity to do one of those activities in a little while as well. So hopefully you'll feel like you've not missed out on any of that. So what we have got ready for you as well is a little Pechakucha style presentation of what actually happened at the in-person events. And they're basically 20 visual impressions. Each of them is about 20 seconds or so. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavor of what was going on. For the first time since the pandemic, we wanted to bring people back together in person. But to make it easier for people to travel to the SPDN and to participate no matter where they were, we decided not to have one large event in one location, but actually have a number of mini events across 15 locations in the UK, Ireland, Greece, and Slovakia. Thanks to Zoom, we could provide a shared input, which was Rutger Bregman's video on Humankind, A Hopeful History. In his book, he outlines why we have good reason to believe in human kindness and how radically different the potential is if we consider this. Robin Kemp then outlined why this idea of the rich person and a more positive view of human beings is so fundamental to social pedagogy, and how social pedagogy can offer a valuable perspective for practitioners in health, social care, and education. Following on from these inputs, participants in each location were then asked to consider the rich qualities that the people they support in their practice possess, and what we can do to create an environment where society actually recognizes the strengths and qualities and those enriching features. To get a shared understanding of the qualities that make people rich across our different locations, we asked participants to use Menti and post those qualities on a word cloud. And as you can see here, the things that were posted most often were love, kindness, empathy, being caring, and being unique.
The mini SPDN event of Velos Youth in Athens hosted 20 participants. Participants were professionals from our organization, professionals from other humanitarian NGOs, social pedagogy practitioners, postgraduate social pedagogy students, and young people with a refugee or migrant background. The SPDN gave young people the opportunity to understand the power of their voice and professionals to realize how collectively we could move things forward. All these years, SPDN offers the chance to professionals to exchange navigation tips, coordinations, and destinations and explore possibilities of joint journeys. Thank you.
Everyone in this photo is either a colleague or a graduate of mine, and while we all enjoyed the sun, one of the most startling things that we all agreed on was how uncomfortable we were about thinking about our service users and their families and carers are as less than rich. They have a diversity that some of us don't, and we were taking away from the day how much we need to cultivate an environment for these people.
At Ochotar School we were 18 participants, one of which was external. The sharing and working together was experienced as inspirational and confidence building. The concept of humankind's intrinsic goodness resonated in all of us, together with the image of looking beyond of what meets the eye in order to discover and acknowledge the true being in each person around us.
Hi from Paisley and Kibble Education and Care Centre, and thanks very much for letting us take part on the 8th of June in the network event. We're a group of 30ish people, social paid facilitators, and a lovely mix of others from our sector who were able to share views, ideas, and lots of laughs. Hopefully, we'll all meet again soon. Thank you.
Hello from Tipperith. We valued the opportunity to spend time with colleagues in a more discursive setting, And we also found the discussions around the power of language to be really impactful.
Hi from Derbyshire. Sorry, I personally can't be there on the 19th, but we had a great session here on the 5th with colleagues from Derbyshire County Council, joined by friends and new faces from a range of external organisations. Some great connections were made, and the activity stimulated conversations both expected and unexpected. Thanks so much for all the content development from colleagues across the network. Looking forward to the next SPDN. Have a great day today. Thanks.
Hello, this is Lois from UCLan. We held an event at Burnley which was attended by Ian from Virtual Schools in Lancashire County Council and two of our master's graduates, Fiona and Ed, and then two of our degree graduates, Frank and Dan. It was a really small group, but we loved it. We had a really good catch up, and it was great to welcome Ian as a new participant. And the thing that resonated with us was the fact that sometimes the system can be really difficult to change, but actually we can start to change people's mindsets about how we view the people that we work with and see that real richness in them. It was a fantastic session, and we all really loved the new nature of the SPDN.
Hi, this is Nikki Stubbs from the Worcester University group. We had a mixed group of academics and students coming to our event, as well as representatives from Children's Services at the local authority, the CEO of Kinship Carers UK with her granddaughter, a trainer for trauma-informed parenting, a play advocate, and a journalist from Traveller Times, which is a newspaper for Gypsy Roma traveller people. What seemed to resonate with our group was the importance of seeing people as more than their need, which is what Robin referred to in her video. We all enjoyed the day and would love to be involved in more events in the future.
Melanie Kurtz from East Riding of Yorkshire Council. We had many colleagues sat around the table from our Children and Young People Support and Safeguarding Service and also our Early Help and Prevention Service. We had frontline practitioners right up to managers, area managers, and also heads of service. And I think the main thing that we took away was the language. So, you know, talking about someone's inner richness and how powerful that is than maybe some of the other language that we might use, and how we can bring out everyone's inner richness.
So what we'd really like you to do is to just talk about with each other. You have about 15 minutes, and I think we've got about 4 people in each room, to have a conversation about what you took from the SPDN, from that event. So from different sites, so everybody's going to be mixed up, and some people might not have been at one of those events. So there's a poll going on just at the moment that you're all being asked to fill in. Gabriel, does that give enough in terms of the explanation? 15 minutes to talk about what some of the takeaways that you've taken, because I think they'll be different in different settings, because context is everything.
Yes, and if you weren't at an SPDN event in person, then your challenge is slightly different, because we'd like you to think about what makes the people that you support in your practice rich, inherently rich and resourceful. Okay, so what are the qualities that they possess that makes them rich and resourceful? Okay, we should hopefully have everybody back now, and we hope that you had some enriching conversations. If there's anything you need us to know from those conversations, anything you need to flag up, then please feel free to just send a direct chat message to me, and then we can weave things in or respond accordingly. We're going to continue now with Cecile's presentation, and then we'll take a short coffee break after that. So Cecile, I will hand over to you whilst I'm getting the PowerPoint up.
Thank you. And I will give a bit of background on this idea of working from an image of the rich child. So the reason why I'm talking a little bit about these ideas of working from the image of the rich child is because I've spent the last few years trying to work out what happens in practice in a children's home in England when people who work there, people who have who are social pedagogy practitioners, are trying to work from an image of the rich child. And so I want to kind of share a little bit what I found. And as Meta, you were asking, then I can also give a little bit of background on this idea of working from an image of the rich child. Can I move the slides, Gabriel, or do you do it? Okay. So this, in terms of background, in the late 90s, early 2000s, when the UK started to think there were very interesting ways of working in Germany, in Scandinavia, on the continent, of working within welfare services, especially with children, and especially with residential care. They kind of started to pay attention to social pedagogy. And one of the ways where that kind of came through was, if we think about children, if we think about human being in a different way, then we can work a little bit against the very procedural and the very formulaic way that children's services at the time are set up. In the UK, there is a very strong procedural way of working. And so the regulations for children's home, the regulations from early years in schools are very set, and practitioners have to follow procedures. And it's very much the training of the workers is bound to applying procedures and knowing the procedures without really thinking about the consequences, and also without really giving lots of importance to the thinking and the decisions that are being made behind that, not as a kind of, okay, if this happened, then I should do this, but much more about the kind of it depends, and the very thoughtful way of thinking about how we build relationship that was much more apparent in, for example, in Germany, in residential care in Denmark. And so two academics from the Institute of Education kind of looked at other systems, and especially in Italy, the Reggio Emilia schools that were created by Loris Malaguzzi offered this idea of working from an image of the rich child. And that's something that they kind of looked into as an alternative to what they call the very atomized child. So like again, in England, there is the Children's Act 1988, which takes the needs of the child as really the linchpin of the whole system. So in education, in social care, social worker assess the needs of the child, and then they allocate resources to meet those needs. And all of the system really is geared towards that. And now it's, more than 30 years since the Children's Act has been implemented and is in law, and it's very much part of the narrative, and it's very much mostly unquestioned. And so what Peter Moss and Pat Petrie suggested is that instead of thinking of the child in need, we thought of the rich child, then there would be possibility to transform the system and be less formulaic and actually be more human in the relationships that we build with people we work with. And so this idea of working from an image of the rich person, the rich human being, kind of started to take hold, and was one of the ways where social pedagogy training took place. And so the mini events that we had a few weeks ago that some of you participated in, but others didn't, we were trying to think of how can we do that in our context? How can think of the people we work with in a much more humane way, in a way that doesn't see them as a collection of needs or as a problem, because the deficit model is very much part of the way to the system. The social care, the welfare system is set up, and it makes us think about people in a specific way. So, and I'm going to, I hope that's enough background, and if there isn't enough background, then please do ask more questions. So I kind of took this idea and I said, well, what does happen then in a children's home, in a residential children's home, if the staff is working from an image of the rich child? And I try to explore that very much in practice. And one of the ways I did that was, and it's rather long quote, so I'm moving now to the slides and I'm not going to read it, but basically what it says is that those images, they are an artifice. This is a quote from Malaguzzi, so this early year education, Italian early year education theorists, and he talks about images as being an artifice, a human, a man-made artifice. And I think that's really important, because those images, they don't exist really. They just are kind of incentive to action. This is how we think. So if I think of a child as actually being very capable of doing things, whether they're doing something that I think is wrong or is naughty, still, if I think of them as being capable of doing that, my response to them is going to be quite different than if I think of them as vulnerable and at risk. And I think that's kind of the contrast that's there. And so this image of the rich human being, so this kind of much more positive, much more enabling way to think of the human being, will have consequences. And so I think it's important again, another explanation is that this is really very much in the realms of idea, of thoughts, of why is it that we do the things we do? And that's kind of a little bit of a position for images. Can I have the next slide then, Gabriel? Okay, and so this is then the context where I did the field work. So I worked in a children's home where there were 8 young people that lived there. They were all boys, and there I worked with the young people, but also with the staff team. And it's a description for those of you who don't really know how the children's home is set up in England. And so there were permanent staffs. There was quite a strong hierarchy. I think it's a feature of a children's home in England. And then this on the right there, there is a description about what I did. So I spent some time being with the young people, trying to understand things from there. I was then a participation worker, which meant really try to listen to them and give them find ways where they can express themselves and change a little bit the way that their life is in the home. And then I ran sessions with the staff team, so 7 sessions with the staff team, where And I use it a bit as like, I use this idea of working from an image of the rich child as a poking stick to kind of help them to talk about how they made the decisions, what they thought, the thinking behind what they did, and using Malaguzi's idea of the rich child. So the child, and it doesn't have to be a child, that applies across the whole of the life range, but a human being that is capable, that makes social, that wants to make social relationships, that is powerful, that can think and that can work through problem. And so that was really the kind of the setting that I started with. And I was very much hoping that I would find a rich child. I think that's quite important to say that. Can I have the next slide then, Gabriel? Okay, and as we were working through, especially with the staff team, so I would have those workshops with the staff team, and then I would bring to them things that the young people had told me and that the young people had agreed for me to share with the staff team. And I would kind of try and say, well, look, this is what the young people think, this is what you did, tell me what that means. And there were a lot of questions about, what do you mean by this, rich? What does that mean? And some difficulties because, so does that mean I have to be positive? Does it mean I have to gloss over all the difficult stuff? So for example, this was an exercise that we did where we thought about, okay, this young person, how are they connected? What's their motivation? And one of the motivation that we talked about was that this young person really wanted to smoke cannabis and was involved in, selling cannabis. And that was a really difficult thing because there was a lot of debate on the staff team. Well, do we put that there? Is that talking about him as rich? And I think that had a lot to do with whether it was legal or not, and lots of discussions around that. So already, I think just this idea of being rich kind of brought things to a certain level of trying to uncover the assumptions behind what we were saying, but it was a quite difficult place emotionally to get at. And I think I'll talk a bit more about that later, but that's quite important. Can I have the next slide then, Gabriel? Okay, so then I after the field work happened and I've done those workshops, I spent quite a lot of time trying to understand what was happened. And what I did is that there were about 31 situations, little things that happened. So for example, there would be a time where we had dinner and there was a discussion that happened and the staff thought that was a great moment where it was really a really good cohesive moment. So that would be one event. There would be a trip to a football match. There would be all those kind of little everyday things that happened. And I kind of use them. And what was interesting is that I had different interpretation about the same thing. So I would have the young people's perspective on one thing that happened. I would have what was written in their care plans about that. And I would have what the staff had told me, and I would have what I made of, because I knew the home very well. And I was there quite involved. And actually those kind of different interpretation came together, and there was lots of recurring themes that came through. And those themes, I think it's quite important, weren't rich. And that was a bit of a surprise, to say the least. So one of the way that the kind of theme that came is this image of the child, the young people, as separated. In many of those situations, there was a clear separation, symbolic, and in the physical space of the home where the children were separated. So this is on the left, you have like this football pitch, and that's one of the young people who did that. And you need to know the name we are, but basically in their mind, they did the home represented as a football game, and there was a separation. There was a young people's team versus the staff team. So that's one symbolic separation that the young people themselves brought. But then there was also much more subtly in the language that the staff use. So for example, somebody was talking about this event going to a football match, and actually the way that that staff member talks about how she had to position herself in the space of the home in a certain way to kind of catch the young people, which again gives this idea of separation, because it's as if she has to kind of put herself in a place where she's not expected, though, which is the domain of the young people. And she had to kind of draw them in now. And that's something that recurred in many, many places. So like this idea of the staff and the young people being separated is really, really strong. Can I have the next slide, please, Gabrielle? Okay. Then there was another image, which I called acultural, which meant that the kind of the meanings that the young people themselves attributed to a situation actually in the kind of big narrative, the official story of the home, that was cut out. And in this example, so it's the same day where the staff is talking about how nice it is because all the young people were sitting at the table, they had individual placemats, and they were having their takeaway together. And, you know, it's like a family, we have the rich child there, teamwork. And that was a really good event for the staff. Now, in parallel to that, one of the young people who was there kind of talked about that. And I was noticing that he was quite uncomfortable sitting. So he started to eat his takeaway standing up. And I said, well, and another mom said, why don't you sit down? And as he sat down, he was quite uncomfortable. And he was sitting cross-legged on his chair. And there was all this theme of, you know, you're not comfortable there. What's happening? I would like to make you comfortable. And actually it turned out that the setting itself of the meal was quite different. He came from Egypt. And so his way of having a meal together was very, very different than the individual placemats that were set and how the staff has set it up. And in a way, in the how the staff talked about those meals, in the guidance, that's very strong, and in how Ofsted looks at that. And the manager at the time had a lot of pressure from Ofsted to think through and to make those connections, meant that actually this young person and their discomfort at eating meals, sitting down in a very English manner on separate plate, was completely glossed over, invisibilized, excuse me, from the way that he in Egypt had experienced those way of having shared meals where there was no individual placemats, and when it was quite a different setting. So that's an example of the way the kind of cultural meaning is kind of made invisible towards kind of a group shared meaning. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, another one where again, the meaning from the young person is also pushed aside. And that had to do with the young person seeing their situation in a very political manner. He said, this young man, Louis, my nickname at school is Gandhi, because I sit down and I have, I don't know how he phrased it. Yeah, he refused to engage as a protest. That's what he said. So again, this kind of very political way, it's a protest. And yet the way that his situation was framed in his care plan was in terms of emotional needs and in terms of being very, you know, it's quite a difficult situation. So in a way, in terms of emotion, he's emotionally vulnerable because he's at a time of transition. And yet this young man, when I spoke to him, he was talking about it in terms of, you know, refusing to engage as a protest, which was quite interesting. Can I move on to the next slide, please, Gabriel? And there again, this idea of like these young people seeing their situation politically came back in another situation. So this young man there is actually going on hunger strike because there was some racist comments that were being made towards him, and he was protesting against them. And that was something he did on several occasions. But again, the way that the staff talks about it slightly dismisses it, but also I think it is really important, has a lot of pressure from the guidance from other workers, because of course if a child stops eating in a children's home, it's not something that you can ignore. But for example, there is an extract from the organizational procedures manual, where it says medical advice must be sought if children consistently refuse to eat. And any strategy must be agreed with the social worker and outlined in a child placement plan. And I think we all know that saying, oh yeah, this child is in hunger strike to a social worker would fall very, very differently than if we say, you know, we're trying this and this child is not eating, and that's a sign of emotional, you know, it's in emotional turmoil. But again, it's kind of which story do we choose to use? And the staff has, and I think that's very important, because at the beginning I said that using this image of the rich created the rich child, the rich human being, created quite a difficult, it was quite difficult emotionally for the staff to deal with that, and myself. And it's this kind of the fact that there is very, very little awareness in how those stories that the young people say, how they're being invisibilized, and actually bringing them up to the fore and talking about them is deeply uncomfortable. And I can tell you that that was quite deeply uncomfortable for myself, because it made me realize how subtly I had enabled the young people I was working with to be something that wasn't rich. So can I have the next slide then, Gabriel? And I think rather than saying, I really was looking for the image of the rich child within that home, and there was no rich child, Rather, there was a frequency of themes that came back, which were the image of the child and the adult are separated. And then this kind of decontextualized, which is kind of bringing together the kind of where the cultural meanings are being invisibilized and the political meaning that the young people would put there. And when that was being invisibilized, and you can see how those are the highest frequency that come up in how often those themes come. And you have others, you know, competent. There were only 4 of them. You have involved in caring relationships. There was 5 of them. But again, there was an element of surprise in those caring relationships, because, oh, but like those young people, they care towards each other, but that's an adult thing to do. So it was full of contradiction as well in those things. And I again want to say that this wasn't a conscious decision from the staff, from the people and the residential care worker that I was working with. But in a way, the kind of generic image that was there, and that's very much reflected in a lot of the work that's been done in residential care, the history of residential care, is that the child is really, really marginalized and is kind of made as other. And it comes through this mechanism. And if you have time to read the slides, you can kind of explain about that. So I think what the conclusion that I came to is that how the institutional logic, so the logic of needs. So, you know, this child is saying he's on hunger strike, but actually he's verbally needy at a difficult time in his moment, and we need to support his needs, to meet his needs. How that kind of really shifts and transforms a young person that actually quite competently decided to take action to make his view of the situation known. There was something wrong that had been done, and he wanted to respond to that and to react to that. But that was completely overlooked. And how I think it's while those are small little events, it's the frequency at which that happened within the 3-4 months that I was doing the field work, and that's kind of is really this kind of repetition, and that makes it quite a different thing. So I think if I can have the next slide, Gabrielle. Yes, and I think I talk a little bit about those logics. So the logic of needs, the logic of following the procedures, technical rational logic, and they are making all the multitudes of way of finding of being. They are making that invisible, and so it kind of makes it very difficult, if not impossible, to work from an image of the rich child. Because we have very much got to work from those categories that are in the guidance, and the discourse in the guidance is very much that the child has needs, and we as adults have to meet those needs. But there is no discussions of how those young people that I was working, they have very many ideas of how they need to go about meeting their own needs, but that doesn't come into the discussion. And I think the questions that I would like to open, and we can do that, is, how can we be responsible? Because individually, I think it's really important not to say any member of staff is is individually responsible for that. But I think collectively we can do things quite differently. And that's why events like this, when we really think through those things, are very important. So can we move on to the next slide, Gabrielle? Here we are.
Yes, I wonder whether we're going to take a break first, though. Sorry, and then give you an opportunity to explore some of those aspects that Cecile mentioned in greater detail. I think the point you were making about the frequency kind of really reminded me of this idea of microaggressions. And it's almost like when the young people are faced with this with those very small acts that individually might not mean much, but collectively put together, they feel like a very powerful statement of where the power lies and how we see them. That's quite difficult to deal with, but also it is something that we can shift if we focus on those small acts. And of course, that does not just apply to children, young people in residential childcare by any means. So hopefully you're also able to kind of apply what Cecile was talking about and try and think through, like, to what extent is that true within my context of practice as well. Before we do that, we'll give you a break, and could we be back at 11:20 for a 40-minute sprint of how we explore this, how we shift this. Okay, so I hope that's given you all a chance to have a quick break. If you're back from the break, can you please switch on your screens, because we have a short activity for which we all need to see each other, or as many of us as possible. So make sure your cameras are on when you're back. And what I will do is basically just change the way you see things to follow the video order that I have here on my screen. Cool. So hopefully everybody's back, or quite a few of you are back. If you are back, switch on your cameras, please, and we'll do Mexican wave virtually. Okay. You've probably all been to like stadiums where Mexican wave works. And the way we're going to do this to begin with is that everybody who's now on the left side of my screen, or of people's screen, that includes you, Rob. You might not be able to see it all in one. Starts off, and then we move from the left to the right. Okay, so it goes like this. Are you, Brian, Rob, Lillian? Are you ready for a Mexican wave? We'll see if we can send it over to the other side. Nothing happened. And then it goes Robin, Sue, Veronica, Stephen, and everybody that's underneath them. Okay, so let's try this again. Everybody ready? You need to be ready for the wave. We don't want to kind of send it and then it fizzles out halfway through. Okay, so the idea is a Mexican wave starting from the left of the screen. So everybody that's all the way over to the right. Let's see if we can do this. Ready, everybody? Oh, hey. What happened? Okay, this looks like completely uncoordinated. A Mexican wave.
I don't think I've got the same order as you.
You should all have the same order as me. So it should be me, Robin, Sue, Veronica, Stephen in the first row.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
also, if people are on hide self view, then they won't appear. So you need to enable your self view to be able to see everyone.
Yes, and you need to have your gallery view on. So top right, you can choose gallery view, which then makes this a fair bit more exciting. Okay, let's try this one more time. Ready, everybody on the left. So that's me, Ryan, Rob, Lily, and we'll go first, and then it's Robin, Meta, Laura, and so on and so forth. Okay, ready? Ooh, hey. This looks way better in the room. Okay, we're kind of getting there. Let's try one that goes from the top down. Okay, so we guys in the top row, we start the Mexican wave, and then it goes Ryan, Meta, Miriam, Alistair, and so on and so forth. Yeah, let's try and see if we can do that. So everybody, hands out, get ready for the Mexican wave. This is a little better, yeah, there. Oh, Fiona and team, they saved it for me. Perfect. Thanks very much. That was nearly as I expected it to be. And again, that teaches us something, I think, about yeah, the systems we create and all of that. So over to you, Robin. After a bit of fun and energizing.
Now we're energized. The next step is to have, are we going for a breakout room or are we going for the fishbowl? Sorry.
We're going to do 5 minutes breakout room.
5 minutes breakout room. So we want to just have a 5-minute breakout room to reflect on what Cecile was saying and what are the institutional conditions that limit us in truly focusing on the whole person. And although what we want to do is focus on the things that we can do, it's really important to acknowledge and see what are the things that might be the barriers to our ultimate aims.
To lead us into that next part and to explore some of those things in more depth, we wanted to just ask, first of all, were there any questions that might have come up that you want to ask Cecile?
Nope.
Okay, cool. That was fine as well. So there were a variety of things that kind of really resonated with me. But I think to start us off, I think there is something about the way we think about systems and institutions as one of the systems that is really critical. And it's very much connected to the metaphors that we use when we talk about systems. And when we see systems as machines, when we talk about ourselves as cogs, then that has implications for our agency as practitioners. Our agency is very limited if we just see ourselves as a small cog within a big machine that is gonna keep doing its own thing regardless of our actions, right? Whereas if we see systems as living organisms, as something that's alive because the people and the issues that the system deals with are alive, then everything we do has an impact on that kind of living organism. And so it gives us a very different sense of agency. And so within that context, I think it's worth exploring what can we do to kind of resist that kind of predominant institutional logic of these are systems that act like machines, and what can we do to kind of perhaps find ways in which to just change some of those metaphors, change the stories we tell ourselves about the system and what we're able or unable to do. So I'm curious to invite in a couple of views to get us started and into a bit more of a dialogue. Was there anything from any of your conversations that kind of speaks to that, or anything from your experience that might speak to that? Lawrence, I'll bring you in there.
Okay, so I think we can get a bit too caught up in the systems debate, because we can spend a lot of it. I'm concerned we can spend a lot of energy on things we can't really have a lot of influence over. But what we can have influence over is the direct human relationship we build with the child or the young person or the adult or the elderly person or the wife, partner, that we have complete control over. And I'm a huge believer in the ripple effect. So if you manage to show good social pedagogical work in practice, then I think other people will notice, and slowly transformation comes about in that little group of people that you're working and living and interacting with. And even if it's only 2 or 3 people, I don't think we can underestimate the impact that will have on those 2 or 3 or 4 people. And that can then, they will take that with them, and that will impact on another 3 or 4 or 5 people. So for me, it's about putting our energy into what we can really do to facilitate change, and not spend too much energy on all those other bits if we don't really think we're going to get to a point where we can do something. I'm sorry, my dog is trying to tell me if we need something, I just need to go and deal with her.
Yeah. Thanks, Lawrence. That's a really valuable point, and it kind of speaks to that bit about if we see systems as inherently being about the human beings and their relationships, then the thing to do is to look at what can we do to improve all those relationships. And that I think does not just include the relationships within my team, but it also includes relationships with other relevant agencies. So with, say, the children's social workers or the mental health practitioner or school, and all of those people that are part and have a role to play within the life of the person that we support. Fiona, you mentioned something about the use of language in how we offer and recognize job roles. Do you guys want to say a bit more about that? So I think it's a great point. Language is one of the ways in which we can talk, we can share a different story.
We were talking about the legislation that's put onto us in terms of regulations. So we have a supported living service, or we have a day support service, and we choose to use the term co-worker rather than support worker when we talk about each other, but we still fall into that trap of having support plans and risk assessments for people. So we were talking about where does the balance to that come? Where's the competency assessment, or whatever we choose to call it? Where does that live? How do we promote that?
Yeah. I think there's something there as well about, like, it's not necessarily throwing out what we've done so far, and I think that speaks to Cecile's earlier point, but just changing the language of, instead of risk assessment, we talk about risk and benefit assessment, for instance, because we balance the risks and the benefits that a person might get from engaging in a certain activity that does include a certain level of risk. And suddenly it becomes a much more holistic, much more nuanced, much more well-balanced conversation. Cecile, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, but I also think the meanings that we give to, whether we call it a co-worker, whether we call it a competency assessment, because the meaning comes with the relationship we have. So if you give the competency assessment to a social worker whose understanding is a very deficit one, they're still going to be this kind of meeting of those different meanings. And I think for me, I would be really interesting, and it really has to be explored when I do that in the moment with the people. How can I try to give that tiny little spark to that person who a competency assessment, who can't think about that because they are being told, and that's what they've done for many years. How can I give them that tiny little spark that they can start moving from a risk assessment to a competency assessment, for example, or to a support relationship to, and again, are there words that we can use not to be a support worker or not to be the helper? And that's where I would like to push. I think that's where we really have to be so attentive in the moment when we are having those things of tiny little possibilities for other meaning, and with the people that are with us, that are doing it at the moment. Yeah, I think I'm going to stop there.
Robin.
Yeah, I think it really relates so well. And what you were talking about in your talk there was a real holistic hermeneutic approach. And a hermeneutic approach is making sure that we are getting all the angles into the dialogue. Hermes was the messenger to the gods, so he took messages to the gods, to the people, and from the people to the gods. So there is something about how our institutional logics tend to be weighted on one particular side. So we have a lot of our institutional logic is weighted in terms of the medical model, this, problem, treatment, cure. And actually, I think one of the things that we can do as practitioners is help to widen those views up, so that you're not just getting the deficit focus, you're also looking at another, many different ways of seeing this human being in their context. And again, it relates very much, Cecile, to just that idea of, and Lawrence said it too, just a little spark in the relationship, and then the ripple effects can start. But we have to be able to challenge a dominant view. And in social work, we've known this for a very long time. We've privileged the voices of doctors, and that has led to the deaths and abuse of children, actually. So it's not something new that we're talking about here, but we do have to try and fix another way of seeing other people, a more holistic way.
Can I respond? Because I think I would like to move away a little bit from the focus on language. Language is very important, don't get me wrong, but it's also very limiting. And I think one of the things I wanted to do in my field work with the children, the residential homes team, was to use embodiment. So I wanted to use theater, and I wanted to use action and the body. And actually, there was a really, really strong reaction against that. People felt so threatened by having to enact what they were doing. And there was lots of reasons for that. But I think what I found really, really interesting is that they felt so uncomfortable with bringing the body into the reflection. And I was thinking, and I think that's very significant, because in a way the language and action are together. They go together, but they also are quite different. And I was thinking, maybe if I was working in a children's home, what I would say is that we have silent hours or silent half an hours where we try to relate to people without the language, but then we bring in different ways of being together, because I also think that the language makes it different. And I'm thinking of like what Pat Petrie and Claire Cameron, when they did the studies of different ways of looking at residential care, they were saying that compared to Denmark or compared to Germany, in England, we have we talk. And actually, that has a big impact in how the staff thinks of the young people they work with. So like, let's not talk, let's use your body. And I don't know, I would actually really like to try that and see what it does.
That sounds very intriguing. So perhaps any of you guys up for giving that a try, let us know how that goes. Any other thoughts on any of those things related to Cecile's input? Stuart, I wonder if I can bring you in, because I know that you've just published a paper on how, or making the argument that schools, as one of the systems that we have created, really radically need to change. And I wonder whether there's anything in there about how we can bring about the kind of system change that we need to create the conditions for a more rich and more nuanced people.
I'm really sorry I missed the morning session, everyone. I'm standing in for Nikki, who led our Worcester network event the week before last. And I really enjoyed speaking with Rob and Alistair in our breakout room. There is that push and pull between kind of enlivened work and statutory duty. That's very hard to disentangle without being seen as either one side or the other. And the schooling system is one site where that's very visible. And I think if there's anything from that paper really that I can kind of generalize, would be that seeing people holistically also includes the staff working within the system, as well as the people that system is intended to support rather than necessarily designed to support. And that comes down to some of the kind of nuts and bolts around how we write our job descriptions, and then how we supervise whether we're doing things right or simply supervising whether we're doing the right things. And that's about, comes down to things like recruitment and what it is that we value in terms of who we're putting in place to oversee certain values and action. These are complicated and complex matters, but it does, I think, come down to a degree, how we go about measuring the progress of our work. And that's where listening to those we support can be amplified. I think amplifying those lesser heard voices so that people's experiences rather than metrics become a value that helps us learn what we need to lead in our practice. And I think we've come to the point of kind of seeing leaders as people who are very good at listening rather than telling. And I guess that's probably where we've reached in education, given the recent kind of acute experience of remote learning, returning to site learning, and then suddenly returning to exam preparation. Oh, some of us were quite aghast. But that sense of leaders lead by listening, leaders lead by learning, and then the direction of travel is towards improving people's experiences, which is that voice that we're referring to, rather than some metric that no one human matches. Apologies if that's contributed little or nothing.
That was spot on. I'm glad I did bring you in. And I think there's that point about we are all able to be leaders in that, with that understanding. And it comes back to, how do we actually listen to learn? How do we listen so that we understand rather than listen in order to respond. And it's a critical difference, because I think when we listen to understand, we're actually interested in the other person's story. We're interested and curious about like what might make a young person go on hunger strike. And we're really trying to understand his frame of reference, and therefore we're better able to share his story rather than just kind of reduce it to what we think is going on there, because we'll need to think about how to communicate that to school and their social worker and all of that. So there is something about whose frame of reference are we operating in, and to engage with that, we really need to engage with learning rather than think that we already know everything that there is, and we need to think about how can we create that space where we're able to share those stories and to tell different stories. I also do want to come back to that bit about communication, because I think it's incredibly powerful within that context, and to recognize that everything we do is communication. So going on hunger strike or being silent is a form of communication, right? You know, it's through the action, and by not saying things, that person is still communicating something. And it strikes me very much that, like, even in those moments when that young person feels like they have very, very limited power, they still find a way to take some power, to be able to express what's really going on for them. And so I think that should give all of us hope that no matter how little power we might have or we might feel we possess, we can still do powerful things. We can still create those kinds of ripples in the system through our actions, and by virtue of doing things differently, to create different ripples and see where they might land. Cecile.
I think it's really important. I think it's also, we have to help each other do that. We have to, because if I do that as myself, depending on the climate, on the culture, on the way people understand my action in the place where I work, there may be very, very different responses. And actually, and I'm going to do a plug there, but at SPA, we're organizing a conference on transgression and transgressing the status quo. And I think it's really, really important not to think of ourselves as just individually. Like, our society makes us think of our freedom comes in the choices we make. But I think our freedoms come from recognizing where we are within the big system. And actually, we can only do tiny, tiny little bit, but together we can do more things. And it's very political, what I'm saying there. It's very against the, liberal capitalist society we are in. But I think there is a fundamental way to think about who we are as people that comes from that. And I can't by myself change many things, but I can be with people who are wanting to do the same thing. So if I want to so for example, we were talking about how to do an assessment differently, and to write as a social worker, would I write an assessment, rather write it to the family that the assessment is made of? But that has implication for how the court sees the assessment. So actually, all of that means that if, as a social worker, and I'm not a social worker, I'm a care worker, but I want to do that there. And it has to have, I want the impact to be really, to be conscious of all those ripples that you were talking about. I have to do it together with other people. And I have to people that give me the point of view of how the court is going to see the assessment and all the social workers. So it's a really activist way of looking at things, but it can't be just by ourselves, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that comes back to that point about relationships. I think one thing that's always really worth keeping in mind is that change happens at the speed of trust. And when change happens at the speed of trust, we need to think about what can we do to build trust with all the people that we come across, because trust is something that we build between human beings. So I'll leave it there. Robin.
Okay, so this leaves us with a last 5-minute breakout room. Gabriel, you're setting those up. And we have a question that if I can put it there. So 5 minutes to come up with one thing that you're going to try and improve the system towards being more of a more positive view of human beings. We have loads of evidence. So what are we going to do? And we just have 5 minutes to get into dialogue with a colleague there, and then we'll come back. Is that okay? Brilliant. Last 5 minutes.
Can I just check on those of you who haven't been able to join the room just yet? Are you able to do that? Do we just want to troubleshoot into some of the rooms where?
Yeah, somebody needs to join Laura.
I can do that. That's fine.
Or maybe we could put Laura in with Lawrence.
Yeah, okay, I'll move that to room 1. Lawrence in room 1.
Yeah.
Perfect. And
that's it.
Fiona's all right. Terry's all right. Farah.
Yeah.
When?
Yeah, they're all in twos now, I think.
When you're, yeah. Okay, Farah, when you're ready to join again. Okay, now there's 3 of them, but that's fine.
That's okay. And Terry?
Yeah.
Terry, I don't know. Terry didn't go into breakout room earlier either. So.
Okay.
I hope they're all right though. But
you're good.
Yep. Cool. So I think we got a few helpful points across.
I think so. Yeah.
I hope so. That flowed pretty well.
I think so.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's a lot of work to bring people to the same.
Indeed.
Watering hole. Or whichever metaphor we might want to choose. Cool. Okay, so basically I will literally just show that slide and tell people that we're gonna email them with all of those different opportunities that there are to keep engaged and then just survive. Do we want people to let us know the action that they're taking?
Could they put them in the chat box?
Yeah.
And then we got a record.
That's the bit I really want to find out about.
And I was also wondering, with the Practice Oasis sessions, we're also looking for people who would like to do one. So to get in touch with me.
Yeah, that might be a good.
Yeah. What's Bianca's one called? Let me see if I can find it.
Can I do one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Come do a Practice Oasis set. Yeah, it's to rehydrate your practice.
Cool.
Any topic, whatever topic you're passionate about.
It's about uncertainty, isn't it?
Well, that's part of it. Yeah, that's one of the elements, but yeah. God, I can't wait for this new website. It's driving me bonkers trying to find things.
The use of reflection and how we balance
safety.
There
we go.
Yeah. Good.
Brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah, just tokens. It's usually a good sign. Matt is still talking. Catherine is back. Matt is back. Secunda is back. Welcome back, everyone. We've still got 30 seconds
Hello,
left.
guys.
Hello, Secunda.
Hello, you okay?
I'm all right. How are you?
It's good. I'm all right. Everything. How are you?
Yeah, good. It's nice to see you and your colleagues here today.
Yeah, you too. I think the last time we saw you was at the training at the B Theatre.
That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's a while back. Lovely.
So pedagogy at the B Theatre.
Yes, correct.
I like that.
Perfect. Okay, thanks for coming back for just a very quick final wrap up. What we'd like you to do before you leave is to add your action, the one thing you're going to do here in the chat, because we're very curious of like what initiative might this have inspired you to take forward. If you are interested in further learning opportunities around social pedagogy and continue to engage with this community, there are a number of different opportunities for that. There's the Spa Practice Oasis, which is going to start at the end of this month on the 30th. And you can find out more about that on their website. SPA are also helping fundraise for their social pedagogy youth ambassador to go and learn about social pedagogy in Denmark. And there's a SPA annual conference coming up in August as well. And there are a number of different online courses that we offer as well. And of course, we'll keep going with the SPDN to ensure that we continue to build and develop our social pedagogy community in the UK and internationally, really. So we'll send out all of these details by email as well, and send you a recording of the bits here in this session that weren't conversations in the breakout rooms, because those didn't get recorded. And hope you enjoyed the session, and that you've taken something back to do in your practice and to positively affect systems change. If you do want to find out more about systems change as well, there's a whole range of stuff that we'll be able to share with you as well. So keep going, keep at it, and keep connected. All the best. Thanks for today, everybody.